If your low strings sound thin, muddy, or just not that cinematic, you're probably missing one simple orchestration tip. Today, I'm going to show you 3 ways to stack other instruments with your basses, so your low end sounds dark, ominous, and film score ready. And the third layering trick, well, that's my favorite, and it's the one that many composers overlook, but it can make such a huge difference. Alright, let's jump in. So this first layering trick, it's really bread and butter. It's so easy to do, and it makes your low strings sound really ominous and thick. And that is layering your cello with your bass. Bass strings are a transposing instrument, meaning they sound 1 octave lower than the way they're written, and most modern string libraries, they capture this. I'm using Cinematic Studio Strings basses. So when you look at the piano roll, your bass string line is going to look the exact same as your cello line, but it's going to sound an octave lower. So you can literally just copy and paste your cello MIDI into your bass track, and it's going to sound great. It'll have this great layering effect. Let's take a listen. Just bass. It's a good vibe, but listen how ominous it gets when we add the cello in. Layering your cello and bass together, it's so easy to do. It's used all the time from Hollywood composers, from Hans Zimmer to John Williams and on and on. And now that you have an ear for it, I guarantee you're going to hear it across soundtracks that you listen to. So let's move on to technique number 2 now, which is on top of the cello and bass, what other instruments can you layer in that will complement this sound that you're going for? And there are quite a few combinations that you can use that will give you different sounds. So let's take a look at some of those. You want to add a bit more dimension to your low strings, a little well-rounded sound. Try adding in a bass clarinet and just have it double the same line as the cello and the bass. So for the bass clarinet, I'm actually using Spitfire Symphony Orchestra, the symphonic woodwinds, bass clarinet, all techniques on long. The bass clarinet adds a nice woody kind of human feel to it. Some might feel like it's too bright depending on what you're going for. So then you can reach for the contrabassoon and give that a try. For contrabassoon, I'm using Spitfire Symphony Orchestra, contrabassoon patch, all techniques on long. The contrabassoon stacks really nicely because it brings a nice low-end, deep, bitey type of sound, but it has good definition. And you can, again, just repeat the same line that you're playing with your bass and your cello. I like the cello, bass, contrabassoon stack because it really gives a very something bad is about to happen type of feel. Whereas the bass clarinet feels a little more mischievous and playful to me. But again, this is all just to taste. You can stack these or layer these for whatever sound you're going for. I'm just giving you some examples. One of my favorite instrument sections to layer into this would be French horns. And again, you can just double the bass and cello line into your French horns, and it'll add a nice element that sits in the mix really well and gives a little bit of definition and clarity to it, but it doesn't really stand out. It just kind of builds to that ominous sound. For my French horns, I'm using Cinematic Studio Brass, solo horn, legato's turned off. And notice I'm really kind of holding back on the modulation. I'm not letting that French horn attack really hard. I just want it to be a nice subtle component of the overall mix. And so when you add in the cello and bass, you get this. Again, very subtle, sits really, really well in the mix with the two. But if you want to add the contrabassoon back in and get a little bit more kind of beefiness to it, you can do that and you'll get this sound. And that contrabassoon is pretty prominent. I could probably pull that back a little bit in the mix and it would sit better in there, but you get the idea. Another good instrument you can reach for while you're layering is the trombone. The trombone has a really good bitey sound. It's important though to keep it down in your mix if you're trying to sit it together and make it feel like the cello, bass, and trombone are all kind of acting as one sound. If you get if you ride your modulation too high on the trombone, it can really start to stand out. It gets the much higher end of the instrument starts to poke out. But if you keep it low and keep it controlled, you can get a really nice sound like this. In addition to the French horns doubling the cello and bass line, you can also use the French horns to create these kind of nice swells as well that will, kind of add another element of foreboding into these dark and ominous strings. And that can sound something like this. Another way to add a feeling of uneasiness and uncertainty, while it's not a bass instrument, you can add in a simple, really subtle string tremolo on top, and that'll just create a little bit of uneasiness and the feeling that something bad is about to happen or something's not quite right. So you can barely hear it. So you can barely hear it. It's so subtle. But again, it just adds a little bit of paranoia and anxiety to the whole section there, just up there fluttering around. These are just all tools and techniques that you can use, and there's no rule book here. You can use all of these together. You can use certain ones to evoke a certain feeling or sound that you're going for. I'm just giving you different examples of some instruments that pair well together when you're dealing with creating these low, ominous strings. And that brings me to the third technique, which is my personal favorite, and that is you don't have to stick with the orchestra. You can start layering in synth as well, particularly on the low end. A lot of composers use this trick, and newer composers don't think to use this trick, but you can layer in synth on the bottom end that it just very subtle, adds kind of a sub-bass sound, fattens the whole thing up, or even pulses to kind of keep the rhythm going forward, but it's so subtle that you feel it, you don't necessarily hear it. Let me give you an example. I've created a diva track here, and it's just a simple bass tone, and I'm just pulsing that bass tone. It's kind of a pedal tone sound, although it's not just a one straight note. It's staying on the root, and it's pulsing every quarter note. And I actually fade it in from the front, so by the time we hit the second part of the passage, it's getting louder. So a technique like this can create a little bit of motion and forward momentum, again, that you feel. You don't necessarily hear it because it's so subtle and it's so deep, but you feel it pushing you forward. So that's just a simple pulse with the diva. If you want something a little more complex, which is a sound, you can go for another synth. In this case, I use the Legend HZ, and you can add in something with a little bit more motion to it. So that's the third orchestration technique. Get outside the box of the orchestra, build in some synths on the low end that complement your low end strings, your basses, your cellos, and it adds weight. It can add momentum and motion like we were just showing, or it can just be a straight pedal tone that just creates a nice sub bass bottom end. So the last stack that I want to share with you is a really cool one, and it's not a lot of different instruments. It's really only a handful. It's your cellos, your basses, bass clarinet, French horns, a synth, and some percussion. The difference here is how we're applying these instruments. So in this instance, we're not actually doubling the cello and the bass. We're having the bass play a single pedal note, the root note, the whole time. And we're taking the cello and we're adding in an ostinato. So we're having the cello do a really kind of deep ostinato sound. The cello itself actually adds in a bit of a motor, so we don't need that from the synth anymore. So now we're using the synth to reinforce the lowest of the low end. It's also playing the root note just with a nice deep bass sound. So as you can see, it's not that difficult to create deep, ominous strings that don't sound thin, don't sound weak, or too muddy. Really, it's just about layering instruments. It's about knowing some simple arrangement techniques that help you get to that type of sound and vibe that you're going for. If you enjoy this type of content, be sure to like and subscribe. Leave a comment below and let me know what your favorite techniques are for creating this type of low, ominous sound. Do you use the ones I talked about, or do you have other combinations that we should all know about and be trying out? And don't forget, never stop playing, never stop composing. Get out there and create some awesome low-end strings.